Buddies, are you ready with your cola and chips? This is definitely a thriller and psychological horror film, and the opening will give you an intense visual shock. The story begins. All the officers were stunned by what they saw. The killer's method this time was highly artistic. He fixed 12 bodies to a dining table using steel pipes in a cruel and savage manner. Some had even had their arms chopped off. This scene once again shattered the police's understanding of crime, and this was already the fourth murder case. The first case was a bizarre and eerie massacre. The officers who arrived at the scene were all visibly shaken. When Lois arrived, the first thing her subordinate said was,
"You're not gonna believe this, detective."
Some colleagues suggested handing this case over to the FBI, because they've never seen such a horrifying crime scene. The mother and 2 children were tied to chairs, with their mouths stuffed with meat. Nearby, there was a meticulously baked pie. The ingredients for this pie had all been provided by the father of the family. He was marinated by the killer and placed into an oven, then turned into delicious smoked meat on the dining table. His cheeks were sliced into ham and cooked with his liver to make a delicacy. The most heinous part was that the killer had boiled the family's baby into a pot of soup. But what confused all the officers was that the scene was eerily clean. All the DNA present belonged to the victims, and there were no other fingerprints. There were no traces of cleaning agents or bleach, which meant the killer hadn't cleaned up the scene. An almost impossible thing to do. The only clue was a strange liquid on the ground. That liquid had been sent to the CDC for testing, but the results were not yet in. Even the expert team sent from headquarters couldn't find any flaws. They hadn't missed a single detail. What puzzled everyone even more was that the victim's family was completely innocent, with no enemies. Lois believed that the killer must have committed similar crimes before. This was not the work of a novice because the technique at the scene was too professional, almost perfect. At this point, a colleague said he had checked all available records and found no similar cases, and just when everyone was at a loss, a reporter from the church suddenly showed up. Lois was quite puzzled when had church news agencies become interested in homicide cases. Megan explained that their organization was very concerned about social justice and belonged to liberal Catholics. However, Lois immediately saw through Megan's real motive.
You want to drive traffic to your dwindling online site by talking about murder. The more gruesome, the better. The more traffic.
Reluctantly, Megan confessed that the victim's family had been devout believers, and their pastor was a close friend of hers. Upon hearing about this, she believed that the family had been subjected to a ritual sacrifice by the killer, with no breakthrough in sight. Lois came up with a bold idea. She shared some of the information with Megan, including the way the father had been cooked and the causes of death of the others. The mother and 2 children's deaths were the most disturbing. They all died of heart failure.
They were watching, and their hearts stopped beating. Died of some sort of acute shock.
It was the neighbor who called the police at 3 a.m., saying he heard loud music coming from next door. When Lois mentioned that the music playing was Mozart, Megan immediately named the piece.
The Requiem. It's the Requiem?
Yes, how did you know?
It seemed to fit.
Hearing Megan's response, Lois became suspicious of her, but after some testing, Lois realized that it was just Megan's guess. Soon, Lois realized that Megan might be helpful in solving the case, so she began describing the strange sticky liquid found at the scene. Its scent changed from an orange smell to amber, and then it smelled like rotting meat with a burning odor mixed in. However, Megan couldn't identify what it was. The case here hasn't made any progress, but another one strikes again. 3 men were severed at the waist and hung on the wall. 2 of them even lost their lower halves. However, the scene wasn't as terrifying as expected. What truly sent chills down everyone's spine was that there was not a single drop of blood in the 3 bodies, even though they were hanging upside down. Once again, strange sticky liquid appeared on the ground. Lois immediately ordered to find the blood. She didn't believe the blood could just disappear. It must have been hidden or poured out, and she demanded that search dogs be sent to help locate it. At this moment, Megan suddenly spoke up.
Romans 6.
Lois immediately kicked Megan out and warned her that this was a crime scene, and most criminals appear at these scenes. What if the killer had set his sights on her? Realizing the gravity of the situation, Megan turned and fled. But Lois never expected that as soon as she got home, she would sense someone had entered. She quickly drew her weapon and began searching. At that moment, a figure flashed past her from behind. When Lois caught up, she saw a tape recorder playing a requiem. Pulling back the curtains, she spotted a figure. Lois didn't hesitate and ran out, shooting at the person she saw, but missed. The next day, Megan found Lois again, Lois voiced her suspicions, saying it felt like the killer was toying with them, which made her uneasy. She then mentioned the test results of the sticky liquid. It turned out to be high-concentration sulfur dioxide. Hearing this, Megan seemed to have thought of something.
Someone is messing with you.
Go on, Cagney to my Lacey.
That's brimstone.
What?
From the Bible. It's what's in acid rain. It's a curse, biblically. It's what's behind the acrid smell you described before. The breath of Yahweh like a stream of brimstone doth kindle it. Book of Isaiah. Or a third of mankind was killed by these 3 plagues, by the fire, the smoke, and the brimstone, which proceeded out of their mouths. Book of Revelation. Always comforting. That one.
Great. A religious psychopath.
It seemed the killer was mocking the entire security system. As the sheriff, Lois was troubled by this, and she spent the night drinking, sleeplessly searching for clues. Luckily, Lois had a thoughtful young daughter who gave her an important hint. This made Lois realize that in the first family massacre, the killer who murdered the family of 5 might have been a colleague from their university. Only someone with medical knowledge could carry out such heinous acts so calmly. At the same time, Lois started becoming suspicious of Megan. Her reports on the murders read like fan fiction, and it was obvious Megan had a twisted fascination with murder. The next day, Lois gave her subordinates a new order. They were to carefully inspect the crime scenes, including the front door and sidewalks, not leaving anything unchecked, especially any blood stains that hadn't been tested. Anything that didn't match the victims' bodies could be left by the killer, because the tools he used, surgical knives, were easy to injure himself with. The great critic MacArthur once said that many cases are solved through small details. Afterward, Lois went alone to the convent to investigate Megan. She told Megan that the killer might be a colleague from the victim's university, but before she could finish, Megan interrupted, saying Lois was wrong. They then went to Megan's bedroom, where she had created a crime board, detailing the entire case process. Megan explained that this was definitely not the work of someone familiar with the victims. The victims might have known they were being followed, but they didn't realize they had been chosen. The killer had transcended mundane life. His actions were driven by one goal: to summon the apocalypse from the book of Revelation. The killer saw himself as God, but to solve the case, evidence was needed. These were just Megan's speculations and could not be verified. Still, Megan stuck to her theory, claiming Lois's old-school police logic was outdated. The world had changed, and the killer wanted to show the police that nothing was sacred, and no one was safe. Lois was about to argue back, but Megan said Lois was lost and only she could see the truth.
His testimony. To understand this monster, you must reach the ecstatic.
Although Lois didn't fully agree with Megan's viewpoint, Megan insisted on reporting it her way. Just then, Megan received a call from Lois. Lois told her they had found blood stains on the sidewalk and had identified the suspect, Furcus, a violent criminal who had killed dozens and sold organs in the 1990s. Furcus had been sentenced to 21 years in prison and was released 9 months ago. He now lived with his mother. Lois believed Furcus had returned to his old ways, so she led a team to storm his house. However, when they found Furcus, they discovered he was already dead. Judging by the state of his body, he had been dead for at least several weeks. Furcus's mother was also found tied up nearby. Though she was alive, her mind was not right.
Wake up!
When Mother Furcus was carried away, she kept muttering a passage from the Bible. Lois found Megan again and admitted that her earlier thoughts were completely wrong. Now, her instincts were gone, and she felt powerless. It turned out they had all been played by the real killer. The bloodstains found at the scene had been deliberately left by the killer to lead the police to Furcus's house. He even boldly left a note, arrogantly signing his name.
What's his name?
Grotesquerie. I belong to those who have troubled the sleep of the world. And then, may all your dreams come true.
Megan was confused and had no immediate ideas. Lois, meanwhile, discovered a mysterious box with strange symbols carved on it. Her intuition told her that the box must be related to the case, so she took it home. Lois handed the box to her daughter, Merritt, hoping she could decipher its contents. As Merritt loved solving puzzles, Merritt looked at the box with curiosity and said it would take some time to open it. What secrets might be hidden inside the box? The series of bizarre and brutal cases made Lois, who had never prayed, suddenly pray. But just then, she received news that the killer had struck again. When the officers arrived at the scene, they were shocked beyond words. 12 homeless men had been arranged to mimic Da Vinci's famous painting, The Last Supper.
The Last Supper, sister, but for whom? You? Me? All of us?
Just as Lois was at a loss, another murder occurred. This time, the killer's methods were even more chilling. He dismembered over a dozen bodies and reassembled them in a bizarre way. The left side was made up of men, and the right side of women, but what was truly baffling was that the human heads had been replaced with sheep's heads. The sight was enough to shatter the officer's understanding of reality. When Lois arrived at the scene, the first thing the officer said was, "It's like Frankenstein." What puzzled them even more was that all the exits of the house were locked from the inside. There were no signs of any break-in. As Lois stepped through the door, she was stunned by what she saw. The energetic music playing indoors stood in sharp contrast to the heavy mood of the people. Lois angrily turned off the power. The scene before her made her lose control. Jack suggested she go home and rest, as her heavy alcohol scent was not helping the investigation. If this got out, how would the police explain it to the townspeople? Hearing this, Lois snapped. She asked Jack, "You still care about the people? Do you even know who these victims are?" Jack was left speechless. Lois, however, was able to identify each victim by the characteristics of their body parts. They had all been marginalized workers, and each one had been arrested by the police. Their colleagues had locked them up and ignored their pleas for help.
And you want me out of here? For the community, Jack? You don't know the community. That you don't love these people. You would just as soon wait 3 days for the DNA to come back. Tag them all those, throw them in a mass grave with a headstone made out of concrete because they ain't worth the price of a rock to you.
Lois's words silenced the room, and no one questioned her abilities anymore. She immediately ordered her team to gather the victims' files, and they were to be on her desk in an hour. The killer must be exhausted after such a massive operation, and the police might finally have a chance to catch him.
Move, people!
You heard her. Move, people!
Lois brought in Megan, asking her to assist in solving the case from her unique perspective. Megan explained that killing could also be a form of art, and this was the language the killer was using. Once they cracked the language of the crime scene, they would understand what the killer was trying to communicate. After Megan's analysis, Lois concluded that the killer was likely a surgeon, a medical examiner, or someone with knowledge of human anatomy. She suggested checking nearby Army and Air Force bases, especially those who might know her. The killer seemed to be deliberately mocking her, because the victims were all people Lois had once helped. She remembered their names. The killer knows this, so he must be right around Lois. So, Lois ordered an investigation to trace the supplier of the sutures and needles, to figure out how the killer managed to bring the drug into the locked room and leave without leaving a trace. They had to uncover the connections between these events. They thought this would help them solve the case, but the events that followed only plunged Lois deeper into confusion. Her husband had been in a coma for years, and his body was rapidly failing. Red, the nurse caring for him, suggested that Lois consider agreeing to euthanasia, but this was the man she loved deeply. How could Lois sign the consent form? Red comforted her, saying that the case Lois was investigating was too bizarre. She was pouring all her energy into it, leaving no time for her husband, and the killer was like a ticking time bomb, ready to hurt everyone at any moment. Only by signing the consent form could Lois focus entirely on capturing the criminal. Faced with such a painful decision, Lois angrily stood up and left. Just as Lois was grieving, another male medical staff member, Ed, approached her. In Ed's thoughtful and caring conversation, Lois felt a slight warmth. They hit it off, but Lois didn't realize that Ed was a doctor, nor did she suspect his intentions in getting close to her. As Lois was driving home, a figure suddenly appeared not far ahead, and in the next moment, fortunately, Lois wasn't hurt. She woke up in the hospital, temporarily suspended from duty due to driving under the influence, and was handcuffed to her bed to make sure she rested. But the case was still unresolved, and Lois refused to lie there passively. At that moment, Ed brought her breakfast. Lois asked him to unlock the handcuffs for her. After some bargaining, Ed was persuaded, and they excitedly escaped the hospital. They then went to an alcohol recovery center. Listening to people talk about the dangers of drinking, Lois gratefully treated Ed to a big meal. But as long as the killer wasn't caught, Lois couldn't afford to relax. Fortunately, when she got home, Lois received some good news. After Merritt's persistent efforts, She had finally managed to open the mysterious box. Merritt wanted to explain how she did it, but Lois didn't care at all. She only wanted to know what was inside. Inside was a rolled-up note with coordinates written on it. Lois immediately called Megan and then asked Ed, whom she had just met, to protect her daughter while she was away. Although Merritt and Ed had an immediate tension when they met, Lois didn't want her daughter to be in any danger. Before leaving, she left a bottle of pepper spray for Merritt. Once everything was set, Lois and Megan hurried to the location indicated by the coordinates, but when they arrived, they found a massive fire pit. Megan immediately realized that everything before them seemed to match a passage from the Bible.
You have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. Your wrath lies heavily on me. You have overwhelmed me with all your waves.
As they speculated about the killer's intentions, a truck quickly drove up, and a man stepped out. Lois, on high alert, drew her weapon and ordered him to raise his hands. The man explained that he was a researcher from the Geological Survey. Since the natural gas fissure appeared, he had been stationed there, warning everyone who arrived to leave. He warned that the area was full of fault lines, and he was waiting for the government to send people to control it. The man's explanation was flawless, so Megan and Lois had no choice but to leave. On their way back, Lois thought that the killer had given them the coordinates just to intimidate her. Then, Megan spotted someone waving at her by the roadside. Sure enough, they hadn't gone far when they found the road blocked. Lois figured the fire would take some time to put out, so she suggested they stay overnight at a nearby motel. However, when they stopped at a gas station to refuel, the owner urged them to leave quickly. It seemed as though he had predicted something would happen to them, and he even kindly gave them a first aid kit. Lois quickly left the station, but they hadn't driven far when Lois was shocked to see a person wearing a strange mask emerging from the smoke. Then she heard Megan scream in terror. In the middle of the road stood a woman, covered in blood, pleading for them to save her. Megan quickly urged the woman to get into the car. The first thing the woman said after getting in was,
Go! Him!
but she refused Megan's help and chose to get off at a motel instead. Lois decided to stay there as well. However, Megan felt a sense of unease, and as she looked at the purple pool, she urged Lois to leave. But with the fire spreading, this seemed to be the safest place for now. As Lois and Megan checked in, Lois noticed that the motel owner, Andrea, despite using a lot of concealer, couldn't hide the bruises around her eyes. Lois kindly offered to help her, but Andrea immediately declined. Megan, still worried about the bloody woman from earlier, went to the bathroom to look for her, but inside, aside from bloody tissues scattered everywhere, the woman had already disappeared. They followed the blood-stained footprints on the floor, realizing that the woman had run quite a distance. Even though Megan wanted to continue the pursuit, Lois told her not to get involved. Something about this place just didn't feel right. Back in the room, Lois pulled out her weapon with practiced ease, making Megan even more unsettled. At this point, Lois started reporting the situation to headquarters while Megan stepped outside for some fresh air. Suddenly, she saw the man who had waved at them earlier appear on the road.
Lois, I think there's somebody out there.
At that moment, a loud crash was heard, and a car accident occurred on the highway. Megan rushed to help, gently comforting the frightened girl. But then she saw Andrea's boyfriend, Nick, forcefully pushing her towards the pool. Megan hurried to intervene. When Nick heard someone shouting at him, he immediately released Andrea. However, Andrea was not grateful and scolded Megan for making things worse. Realizing the situation was dire, Megan went to find Lois for assistance, but with her signal lost, Lois had more urgent matters to attend to and didn't pay much attention to Megan's plea. She went straight to the front desk to use the landline. Seeing the new scars on Andrea's face, Lois decided to report this matter to headquarters as well. Just then, a gunshot rang out. Luckily, the bullet missed. Lois rushed back to their room, grabbed her weapon, and took Megan to hide in the bathroom. Just then, they heard Andrea's desperate pleas outside. When they rushed out, they saw Nick pointing a gun at the bloodied woman. Lois tried to intervene, but then a car suddenly sped toward them. A man in black stepped out and prepared to take the woman away. Megan stepped forward recklessly to stop him, but was shot in the chest by the man. Thankfully, Lois quickly called for help, saving Megan's life. Father Charlie scolded Lois for being selfish and bringing an innocent nun into harm's way. He then kicked her out of the hospital room. Gail, who had been waiting for some time, initially intended to reprimand Lois, but seeing the deep guilt on her face, Gail changed the topic and began discussing the case. She pointed out that the killer's personal grudge against Lois was obvious. He must hate her deeply to target her so directly. It wasn't hard to guess that the killer was likely someone Lois had previously sent to prison. 2 months ago, a person who had been sentenced to life in prison was released, and the timing coincided with the first case. This person, named McCall, was a ruthless human trafficker with a business that spanned the globe. Lois couldn't understand how McCall could have been released, and Gail was just as confused. Lois, completely drunk, was woken up by the deafening ring of her phone. The killer had struck again, and the scene was so gruesome that even the forensic team was vomiting. When Lois entered the crime scene, she found 3 pregnant women whose bellies had been sliced open, and their babies forcibly removed, and there were mocking words written on the wall.
Follow me, Detective Tryon.
The only calm policewoman told Lois that the killer had performed a cesarean section, and the technique was very skillful. If the wounds had been stitched immediately, the 3 pregnant women could have survived. However, the killer did not do that. Instead, he let the 3 women die from shock and excessive blood loss. What kind of person could commit such a monstrous act? As the case grew more gruesome and the police still couldn't find the killer, the FBI decided to take over the case, possibly forcing Lois into retirement. However, Lois was unwilling to accept that. The killer had committed crimes while she was out of the city, clearly mocking her.
Maybe if you're not on the case, he won't kill anybody else.
Jack, are you delusional? He is never gonna stop. Not ever. He or she wants me to hunt them. For some reason, it has to be me.
Yeah, maybe.
Lois knew she was the only one who could catch the killer. She ordered Jack to check every camera within a 3-mile radius until their superiors fired them.
What does that phrase even mean?
It means our killer is inviting me to be a follower.
At that moment, Jack received a phone call, informing him that someone else had gone missing. Lois rushed to the scene and found 3 children there. The officers told her that the kids were scared out of their minds. Through questioning, Lois learned that their mother had taken in a man the previous night and left with him that morning. The mother was also pregnant. When Lois asked about the man, the little girl shook her head in terror. After comforting her, Lois went to investigate the area. She came across a car parked in the middle of the road, with bloodstains on the passenger seat. Following the trail, Lois walked into an orange grove and saw an elderly woman trembling as she stood not far away, holding a newborn baby and looking terrified. Lois gently took the baby from her. The old woman started muttering incoherently.
He's coming.
Lois took the woman to the hospital, where the doctors revealed that the baby wasn't hers, and the blood on her didn't belong to her either. Lois felt something was off. When the old woman woke up, Lois went in to talk to her. The old woman introduced herself as Maisie and asked where her baby was. Although Lois knew the baby wasn't Maisie's, she asked if she remembered where she had given birth. Maisie quickly changed the subject, claiming that Sarah from the Bible had given birth at 90 years old, so at 66, it was perfectly normal for her to have a baby. She just wanted her baby back and to leave immediately. After hearing this, Lois had no choice but to expose Maisie's lie. Lois told her that blood tests showed she couldn't have children, and at another crime scene, 3 pregnant women had their babies taken. They would test to see if the baby matched any of them. Maisie insisted the baby wasn't related to them and then spoke cryptically about evil spreading through the town. She claimed someone needed newborns for a glorious ritual to fight the evil. Lois asked what glorious meant, but Maisie avoided answering.
Have you ever wondered why you encountered me today, Detective? Maybe it was kismet. Maybe it was meant to be. Maybe it's a sign. I don't wonder. What makes you imagine this is not all just some glorious dream you were having?
Lois didn't believe these rumors, so she left in frustration. Gail informed her that Maisie wasn't her real name, and more intriguingly, Maisie worked for the human trafficker McCall. It seemed like Maisie had intentionally let Lois find her. To uncover the truth, Lois and her team went to McCall's residence. McCall welcomed them inside, and Lois curiously asked how she had been released. It turned out McCall had been released as a confidential informant after exposing other traffickers. Lois demanded to know why McCall was targeting her, committing so many crimes just to mock her. McCall was surprised by this and said she wasn't interested in any of that. She was just part of the glorious ritual. At that moment, the officer noticed someone lying in ambush. He immediately drew his weapon and notified Lois. The next second, after neutralizing the threat, Lois restrained McCall and found a weapon in her bag, but McCall didn't panic. Instead, she calmly said,
"You are being toyed with by a false prophet. He thinks we are on the edge of the end. War, rumors of war, nations rising against nation. He wants to use you as a holy lamb. The death of a good woman will jar the people. Ha! Oh, hallelujah, will jar the people out of their stupor. That's right. It's happening all over. Slaughters of the evil and the good, so people will turn to salvation before the final chapter, okay?"
You know this how?
Why do you think I sent Maisie to you?
Well, does Maisie know him?
She was one of his congregants.
This made Lois realize that Maisie knew the killer. That night, Lois, troubled, received a strange phone call. All she could hear was heavy breathing. Lois immediately guessed it was the killer calling. She didn't hesitate to curse at him before angrily hanging up. Wanting to calm down, Lois tried washing a plate, but then she noticed something unusual. Lois grabbed her weapon and rushed out of the house. Behind her, she heard someone calling her. It was Red, who was holding a gift. Trying to ease the tension between them, Lois, seeing the alcohol, invited Red inside. Red began to talk about her past, revealing that she had known Lois's husband Marshall long before. It was at a public lecture, where Red had become hopelessly infatuated with Marshall. At first, Red thought Lois would understand after confessing, but instead, Lois picked up a weapon and ordered the shameless woman to leave. Red, terrified, rushed out of the room. Lois found Maisie again, trying to get information about the killer, but she refused to speak. However, she did reveal the whereabouts of the missing babies. The police rushed to the location, and when they burst in, they were stunned by the sight before them. Several pregnant women were tied to railings, treated like livestock. Breast pumps were attached to their chests, and the milk was funneled through tubes to feed the babies, keeping them alive. While the officers freed the pregnant women, Lois heard a requiem. Following the sound, she found a hidden room with photos of herself plastered on the walls and an unknown liquid boiling in a pot. Suddenly, a dagger appeared. In the hospital, Megan suddenly woke up. The next moment, the masked figure fell at the sound of the blow. Lois cautiously approached, and when she removed the mask, she froze in shock. The masked person was none other than Father Charlie. She immediately took her team to Father Charlie's residence, and sure enough, they found the missing blood and his tools and detailed documents. However, something strange was found in Father Charlie's wardrobe: a respirator. He was a fanatic believer, and the reason for his brutal crimes was to prove the existence of God to the world. The issue, though, was that in one of the cases, 12 people had died, and their bodies had been turned into a famous world painting. Lois couldn't believe that Father Charlie could have done this alone. She was about to continue the investigation, but Gail insisted that Lois close the case and retire as soon as possible. Hearing about the $140,000 retirement package, Lois felt no joy. She angrily got up and left, but Gail said to her,
"Wake up!"
What made matters worse for Lois was that Ed, who was supposed to be on a date with her, had started a relationship with her daughter. They seemed to be very happy together, which left Lois frustrated. She drowned her sorrows in alcohol. After getting drunk, Lois had a heated argument with them and stormed out of the restaurant. Frustrated, in a fit of anger, Lois threw all the case files away and decided to live the life she wanted. Later, Lois went to the hospital to find her husband's primary doctor, telling them that she had come to terms with everything and was ready to send her husband on his final journey. Red tried to stop Lois from doing so. However, Lois was adamant. Lois insisted that Red perform euthanasia on Marshall and send off the man she had admired. This nearly drove Red to the brink of collapse. After everything was over, Lois felt an immense sense of relief. She had finally let go of all the burdens and could live freely. To celebrate, Lois invited Megan to her home. As Megan excitedly described the feeling of solving the case, Lois voiced her suspicion. She knew Megan had a close relationship with Father Charlie, and they had even had intimate contact. Some of the more difficult cases couldn't possibly have been completed by just one person. During the investigation, Megan had been by her side the entire time. Lois believed Megan was most likely the one who had tipped off the killer, while also managing to clear herself of suspicion. Upon hearing this, Megan quietly picked up a kitchen knife. Lois continued speaking.
Viciousness of these murders. In an effort to get people back to your fading church, asses to masses was the only consummation you could get. Holy shit, sister! I think I just cracked the case. Blasphemy!
Megan decided to stop pretending and lunged at Lois with the knife. They immediately started fighting, moving from the kitchen to the living room. Luckily, Lois was skilled, and with a swift kick, she knocked Megan down. Lois then grabbed a phone book and threw it at Megan, sending her back into the kitchen, knowing she was outmatched. Megan tried to grab a weapon, but Lois stopped her. Lois knocked Megan down and threw her against the wall in the kitchen. Then, she picked up a glass and threw it at her. Megan, in turn, pulled out another knife and stabbed Lois wildly. In pain, Lois grabbed a hot iron pot and poured boiling soup over Megan's head. Seeing Megan collapse to the ground, Lois tried to grab a weapon. However, Megan quickly woke up, dragged Lois back to the kitchen, and continued to wildly stab her with the knife. The scene shifted. Marshall was having dinner at a restaurant with Merrick and her husband, while Ed looked guilty. It turned out they were already married, but Ed had made the mistake many men do, straining their relationship. Marshall intended to intervene, but the more they argued, the worse it got, and he silently left. In the hospital, the nurse was cleaning Lois's body. For some reason, she had been in a coma for a long time. Marshall sat by her side, gently recounting their past, showing deep love for Lois. But then he said something chilling.
Because it's time.
Afterward, Marshall grabbed the flowers on the table and threw them into the trash can without hesitation. It turned out he had decided to euthanize Lois. Even more enraging was that Red, who had cared for Marshall, had long since moved into Lois's house. At the police station, Chief Megan was reviewing a domestic violence homicide case when an officer informed her that Lois was about to be euthanized. It turned out that Lois had been Megan's mentor, and seeing this plot unfold made my brain hurt. I even started to wonder what in the world I had been watching all along. But the story wasn't over yet. The one who injected Lois with the drug was Father Charlie, the one responsible for all the crimes. Now, he was a doctor at the hospital. When Megan arrived at the hospital, Marshall angrily kicked her out of the room. Over the years, her relationship with Lois had become so strained that Lois deeply disliked Megan. Marshall didn't want her disturbing his wife's final moments. When Ed appeared, looking guilty, Marshall was even more furious. He cursed at him and tried to drive him away. In the presence of their daughter and Marshall, Lois was about to take her final journey. In the kitchen, Megan, acting as a victor, mocked Lois. Just as she was about to finish Lois off, a strong will to survive ignited Lois's inner strength. She got up and fought Megan again, but due to her severe injuries, she was eventually overpowered. The moment the oxygen tube was removed, it meant that Lois had lost her life. Megan picked up the weapon again, pointing it at Lois, but she hesitated to pull the trigger. The monitor showed Lois's heart had stopped, and her body slowly floated upward. At that moment, Lois grabbed Megan's ankle and forcefully tripped her, successfully turning the tables. Lois instantly woke up, her heartbeat returning. I believe that all the previous crimes were merely fantasies Lois had while in a coma. She imagined the people she disliked as enemies to alleviate the stress in her life. In reality, Lois's consciousness began to return to her body. While in the illusion, she picked up a handgun and shot Megan in the head, ending her life. The pressure vanished, and a miracle occurred. Just as everyone was criticizing the plot for its poor ending, the story took a 180-degree turn, and the final twist left everyone wanting more. Lois narrowly escaped death's grip. After some time recovering, she was discharged from the hospital following Dr. Whitcomb's assessment. However, it wasn't her family that came to pick her up, but Megan, whom Lois had hated. Megan was once Lois's star student and has now risen to the position of police chief. However, the first thing she did after taking office was to force Lois into retirement. So, in Lois's dream, she cast Megan as an accomplice. As for Charlie being the main culprit, it was because he had once suggested euthanasia for Lois. That's why she portrayed him as a deranged killer in her fantasies. Lois did not go home, but to a friend's house. After some self-reflection, she decided to first address her family issues. Her friend drove her to her daughter's house. Lois had planned to explain her past actions, but her daughter didn't even give her a chance to speak. Filled with resentment over Lois's infidelity with her husband, her daughter slapped Lois. Hearing her daughter's angry words, Lois was heartbroken. She silently chose to leave. Next, Lois went to Marshall's house. Seeing the woman who had already taken her place, she realized her marriage was over. Lois calmly explained her thoughts and then pulled out the divorce papers. Before leaving, she even wished them well. With that weight off her shoulders, Lois felt a sense of relief. She returned to her daughter's house to say what she hadn't been able to earlier. She expressed how much she loved her daughter, that she didn't blame her for anything, but that the slap had hurt her deeply. Then, Lois slapped her daughter back and left, walking away with grace, just when Lois thought she would finally live a peaceful life. During one of her regular psychological consultations, Dr. Whitcomb told her that not only was he interested in her dreams, but another medical doctor, Dr. Smythe, was also very curious about them and planned to have a meeting with Lois. When Lois entered the room, Dr. Smythe got straight to the point, saying that he believed Lois wasn't just dreaming, but actually seeing scenes from the future. This left Lois utterly shocked. She thought it was just Dr. Smythe's hypothesis. But a phone call that night left Lois feeling as if she had fallen into an ice pit. Megan frantically asked for her help. A massacre had occurred in the small town. The mother and her 2 children were tied to chairs, their mouths stuffed with meat, all provided by the father of the family. The most horrifying part was that the killer had turned the family's baby into a pot of meat soup. The scene was disturbingly familiar to Lois. It was exactly the same as the massacre in the dream she had during her coma. In the dream, the first case she had taken on was a family massacre. Now, it seemed the nightmare had become a terrifying reality. Lois couldn't understand it. Could it be that, just as Dr. Smythe had suggested, she had actually seen the future during her coma? Megan's phone call interrupted Lois's thoughts. She asked Lois to meet her at the inn. Upon meeting, Megan presented a bottle of liquid, which was eerily similar to the strange substance in Lois's dream. Lois immediately realized someone must have accessed her medical records. Megan didn't buy into this theory. At that moment, Lois had a bold new thought. She believed she had created the killer and somehow brought him out of her dreams. Megan was completely confused. Lois suddenly asked if she might still be in a coma, that everything happening now might still be a fantasy. She took a small knife from the table and asked Megan to cut her arm. If Lois could feel the pain, then everything around her would be real. Lois didn't reveal the answer. She silently walked into the bathroom. Unbeknownst to her, Megan was in danger outside. The person who came was Megan's abusive boyfriend, Justin. Last night, he hit Megan because dinner was 2 minutes late. If Megan hadn't had a gun, she might have been killed the previous night. After angrily throwing dinner at Justin's face, Megan left the house. She didn't expect Justin to follow her here and continue his abuse. Caught off guard, Megan had no chance against Justin. He pinned her to the bed and began beating her viciously. Luckily, Lois, who was in the bathroom, heard the noise, came out with a gun, and stopped Justin in time. But Justin wasn't afraid of Lois. He'd heard Megan talk about Lois's strange dreams and believed her to be mentally unstable. He didn't think she'd have the nerve to shoot. Megan stood frozen in shock, not knowing what to do. Lois, heartbroken, returned to her friend's house, only to find Marshall and Red there. Marshall said something shocking. He hoped Lois wouldn't divorce him and suggested they could live together. Lois was repulsed. She never imagined her husband could be this shameless. Enraged, she kicked them both out of the house. However, what no one expected was that on their way home, Red suddenly broke up with Marshall. Marshall was suddenly alone. To make matters worse, Megan arrived at the university where Marshall taught and informed him that a female student had filed an accusation against him, claiming he had assaulted her. Marshall was at a loss for words, admitting he'd had a relationship with the woman, but it had been consensual. He argued there was no assault, let alone rape. However, the student didn't see it that way. To prevent Marshall from being publicly humiliated, Megan decided not to cuff him, but he was still going to be detained. Though he paid a hefty bail to avoid jail, the university fired him. A series of blows became too much for him to bear, so after leaving a suicide note, he took poison and ended his life. Fortunately, he was found in time and rushed to the hospital, where he was saved. Red sat by his hospital bed, scolding Marshall for being so selfish. Did he never consider how his daughter would feel by doing this? After crying, Red angrily left the hospital. Once Marshall recovered and was discharged, he received a text message from an unknown number saying someone was waiting for him outside. The person waiting for him was none other than Ed. Ed explained that he had joined a support group specifically for men like them, and he suggested that Marshall check it out too. With nothing better to do, Marshall decided to go with him and see what it was about. When they arrived at the venue, it was already packed. The organizer was Dr. Smythe, who was interested in Lois's dreams. He warmly welcomed Marshall and invited him to give a speech to the crowd about male culture. As a philosophy professor, Marshall spoke effortlessly, and his words deeply captivated the audience, which included police officers, as well as the very psychologist who treated Lois and her attending physician. This made me wonder, could these people be connected to the murder case? Not long after, Lois suddenly checked into a psychiatric hospital. She began questioning the reality of everything, convinced she was already dead and that everything around her was an illusion. Dr. Whitcomb asked her what happened. It turned out that while in a coma, Lois had heard her attending physician and a nurse celebrating. When she woke up, she confronted him, but Charlie claimed it was all just Lois's hallucination.
I do believe it. You know why? Because you are not who or what you say you are. It's some sort of demonic raid.
Charlie angrily interrupted her, saying that no one would believe her. He had saved her life, and he never expected Lois to accuse him like this. After saying that, Charlie walked out. If this wasn't enough to make Lois doubt reality, what happened next pushed her further into despair. That day, after she killed Justin, she left the scene, but when she returned shortly after, not only had the body disappeared, but the whole room had been clean spotless, as if professionals had covered up everything, and Lois just happened to know someone like that McCall, who she had once arrested. She quietly followed McCall and witnessed a shocking scene. Megan was meeting with McCall. Lois went straight to the police station to confront her, but Megan refused to admit anything. She explained that she had indeed met McCall, but not to clean up the scene. She helped McCall rescue a very important subordinate in exchange for crucial information to solve the case. Lois asked about Megan's boyfriend. Megan said she hadn't seen him for weeks. These two events being denied made Lois completely lose her mind. She became convinced that she was already dead, and everything around her was a hell designed to punish her. Everyone was a demon sent to torment her. But when Lois looked at the camera in the corner, she began to suspect her psychiatrist. In her dreams, 5 murders had occurred, and one of them mirrored a real-life murder. The only person who could have replicated her dreams was someone who had access to her medical records. Dr. Whitcomb, aware of Lois's suspicions, tried to explain. Lois had personally consented to have her medical records used for scientific research, and hundreds of internal personnel had access to her files and detailed information. Why does she only suspect him to be the murderer? If anyone were to be suspected, the most likely suspects would be Lois's husband and her daughter, who holds dual PhD degrees in medicine, but there was an even more likely suspect, Lois herself. This sent Lois into deep contemplation. She returned to her room in despair, reflecting on everything that had happened recently. Just as Lois was doubting her existence, Megan suddenly arrived at her room to confess that she had lied. She had indeed asked McCall to handle her boyfriend's body, and now Megan needed Lois's help because another murder had occurred. The scene was eerily similar to the second murder in Lois's dream. 12 people were cruelly fixed to the table with steel bars, arranged to mimic a famous world painting. The person in the center was Lois's attending physician, and beside them was a woman, the student who had accused Marshall of rape. Lois took a deep breath, finally convinced that she was in the real world. The sharp, confident detective had returned.
All right, people. Bag every piece of evidence. Print every surface. Do your jobs and do them well. Meet me in my old office in 1 hour.
You're gonna help us?
Who else is gonna solve this case, Jack? And we need to start telling each other the truth. 1 hour.